broadcast was sudden. Screens across the world went black, then flashed red. A voice echoed, "This is an emergency global address." Inside the United Nations studio in New York, cameras zoomed in on a tall figure approaching the podium. It was Donald J. Trump, face grim, eyes blazing. The American flag behind him glowed in fierce blue. The tension in the room was suffocating. Reporters looked confused. Security tightened around the perimeter. African delegates whispered nervously. Trump slammed a document onto the table. "Today, I issue an international warrant for the arrest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré," he growled. "You cannot challenge America and walk free. The world must decide, order or chaos." Gasps filled the room. Reporters dropped their pens. Some African leaders stood up in protest. Others remained frozen, unable to believe what they'd just heard. Traoré's name flashed across breaking news banners globally. In Burkina Faso, people gathered in silence around televisions, radios, phones, stunned. No one could predict what would happen next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was war of pride, of dignity, of a continent refusing to kneel. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré was watching. Inside the U.S. studio, silence followed Trump's order. Then, chaos. Journalists screamed questions. UN diplomats stood up, pointing fingers. African delegates demanded clarification. But Trump raised his hand. The charge, provoking global instability, harboring foreign weapons, undermining U.S. influence in Africa. He paused, then added coldly, "He has 72 hours to surrender, or face consequences." A hush swept across the globe. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in a dim-lit briefing room, eyes on the screen. His generals waited outside the door, stunned by the news. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He only whispered, "So it begins." He stood slowly, walked outside, and faced his team. "No one moves. No one runs. We do not panic." "But sir," one officer stammered, America is not God," Traoré said gently. "We answer to something higher, our people." That night, protesters filled the streets across West Africa. From Dakar to Bamako, Kinshasa to Accra, the chant echoed, "We are all Traoré." In Washington, Trump watched the footage with clenched fists. He leaned toward the camera in a second broadcast. "This man thinks he's untouchable. Let's show him otherwise." But across Africa, he had already touched millions. The next day, Ibrahim Traoré requested a live broadcast. The global media scrambled. Was he surrendering? Would he run? At exactly 9:00 p.m. GMT, he stepped into a packed studio in Ouagadougou. The backdrop, a single African map glowing behind him. He wore no medals, no weapon, just his uniform and a calm voice. He looked directly into the camera. "I have heard Mr. Trump's orders. I am not afraid, but I am not angry. I am only heartbroken." He paused. Because once again, Africa is being treated like a child, scolded, punished, ordered around. But we are not children. We are nations. Tears welled in the eyes of many watching. "Let the world record this moment," Traoré continued. "I will not kneel, not before Trump, not before America, only before God and my people." Outside the studio, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. In Lagos, an old woman dropped to her knees, crying. In New York, the UN scrambled to release a statement of neutrality. And in Trump's camp, a single advisor whispered, "Sir, this might backfire." But Trump's reply was colder than before. Double the pressure. As Ibrahim Traoré's words echoed across the globe, every screen in Africa stayed frozen on his face. His voice calm, his eyes firm. Yet behind him, soldiers stood ready. In the African Union headquarters, dozens of presidents and prime ministers gathered for an emergency session. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but whispers leaked. Some were afraid. What if the U.S. cuts funding? What if NATO invades? What if we're next? But no one dared say it aloud. Meanwhile, in Ghana, an old man watching from a crowded market shouted, "If Africa abandons Traoré, we abandon ourselves." In Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, people lit candles in the streets. Some held signs with his name, others prayed aloud. But inside the AU chamber, the leaders released a joint statement. "We urge calm. We will not interfere." Traoré read the words in silence. He didn't blink. He didn't frown. He simply turned and whispered to his aide, "When they fear the master more than their people, they are no longer leaders." Outside, a child held up a sign in tears. "Traoré, please don't give up. You are our only voice." The world watched, and the pressure kept rising. 2 days later, the air changed. Burkina Faso's skies were no longer clear. Foreign drones circled overhead. At midnight, power cut out in half the capital. Banking systems froze. Social media feeds turned black. And then it came. The U.S. State Department issued a statement. "We are prepared to intervene militarily to extract the suspect, Ibrahim Traoré, if necessary. This is a matter of global order." People panicked. Mothers ran to schools to get their children. Men gathered in front of city halls holding flags and praying loudly. Grandmothers sang war songs from a time they barely remembered. And Traoré? He was standing on the presidential balcony, alone. A young journalist asked him live on national TV, "Sir, are you afraid?" He looked at her with tired human eyes. "Afraid? No. Sad. Yes. Sad that after everything Africa has survived, they think they can still scare us." She tried to hold her tears. Just then, reports flooded in. A U.S. military convoy had landed in Côte d'Ivoire. They were moving toward the northern border. Burkina Faso had no air force strong enough to stop them. But it had something else, and the world was about to see it. Before sunrise, thousands of women marched to the edge of the capital. No one ordered them. No general told them to move. They came barefoot. Some carried babies. Others held brooms, old pots, sticks, anything. Their goal? To stand between their homes and the U.S. troops expected to cross the border. Old women from rural villages walked miles. Some collapsed from exhaustion, but they refused to stop. One mother said to the cameras, "If they want Traoré, they must pass over our bodies first." The U.S. convoy paused 80 kilometers from the city. Drones recorded the human shield. Officials whispered to each other, "We didn't expect this." In Washington, Trump stared at the footage in silence. "This is emotional manipulation," he muttered. But even he saw it. This was no longer just politics. This was soul. In the presidential office, Traoré sat quietly, watching the feed. He closed his eyes, then picked up a pen. On live TV, he signed a single-page letter and gave it to a journalist. "Publish it," he said. "Let the world know how I truly feel, before they take me." The letter would shake every human soul on earth. And it hadn't even been read yet. The journalist's hands trembled as she opened the envelope Captain Traoré had given her. The cameras zoomed in. News anchors held their breath. People across Africa watched with wide, watery eyes. And she began to read. "To the people of the world, I am not your enemy. I am your reflection. I am a son, a soldier, a brother. I do not seek war. I seek dignity. If standing up for Africa's right to dream is a crime, then I accept my punishment. But understand this. You can silence my voice, but you will never silence our spirit." She stopped reading. Tears streamed down her face. The studio went silent. Millions reposted the letter. Teachers read it to children. Grandmothers prayed over it. In the White House, Trump threw the letter on the table. So now he's playing the martyr? But not even he could stop what came next. Within hours, Major African artists turned Traoré's letter into songs. Footballers raised his name on jerseys. And in villages without electricity, elders told his story by firelight. Africa was no longer watching. It was rising. 3 days into the standoff, Paris issued a statement. France, long entangled in Africa's politics, had stayed quiet. Until now. We do not support any foreign intervention on African soil without full UN approval, the president declared. We urge restraint from the United States and respect for Burkina Faso's sovereignty. It shocked everyone. Some cheered, others questioned the timing. But the message was clear. Not even Europe could stand behind this American aggression. Trump responded in his usual way, fire and fury. France is weak. We won't wait for permission to protect global order. But the truth? The world was growing tired. Even in the U.S., a few senators raised concerns. This isn't justice. This is humiliation of an African leader who dares to think differently. Traoré watched it all from his small office, barely sleeping. Outside his window, thousands still held vigil. One little girl climbed on her father's shoulders, holding a hand-drawn sign. My president doesn't run. And inside the room, Traoré whispered to himself, if a child can stand for me, I must never fall. The U.S. troops moved closer. Burkina Faso's airspace was under surveillance. Tensions reached their peak. Then, something no one expected. A U.S. Special Forces captain refused to move. He stood still during a routine formation, weapon in hand, but didn't budge. A superior officer barked, "What are you doing? Move!" The soldier calmly removed his helmet. I didn't sign up to invade a country that's done nothing wrong. The room froze. He was escorted out, but not before dozens of soldiers looked at each other in silence. The moment was leaked. By nightfall, it had gone viral. American soldier defies order, respects Traoré. Headlines flooded TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Traoré saw the clip. He didn't cheer. He didn't clap. He simply nodded. Even their sons are waking up, he said quietly. The world was changing, moment by moment, not with guns, but with conscience. And what was coming next would shake every throne on earth. In the heart of Ouagadougou, near the dusty edge of the capital, stood a small public school. It had no computers, only 2 working fans. But that day, it made global headlines. Why? Because as U.S. threats loomed and evacuation warnings rang through the city, this one school refused to close. The teachers stayed. The children stayed. When a CNN crew arrived, they asked the headmistress, an older woman with tired eyes and strong hands, "Why are you still open?" She smiled gently and said, "Because we are teaching them courage, not just grammar." Inside the classroom, children were drawing flags, not American flags, but the Burkina Faso flag, and next to it a portrait of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. One boy, no older than 8, looked straight at the camera and said, "He protects us. We don't run." When Traoré saw the footage that night, he didn't speak. He simply covered his eyes with his hand. And in the Pentagon, when the clip played on a muted screen, a U.S. general whispered, "We can win battles, but not hearts like that." Something had changed. The world could feel it. The world watched. The silence deepened. Then, a powerful voice broke through. Zoleka Mandela, granddaughter of Nelson Mandela, stood before a packed hall in South Africa during a memorial speech. Cameras were rolling. Suddenly, she paused mid-sentence, then looked straight into the lens. "I was going to speak about history, but today, I must speak about the present." She held up a tablet. On it, a photo of Captain Ibrahim Traoré standing in front of the African map during his first speech. The crowd hushed. "Africa cannot kneel again," she said. "We owe it to our ancestors. We owe it to the soil. We owe it to the brave. People in the hall stood. Some cried. Outside, thousands gathered. Chants erupted. Free Traoré. Protect Traoré. By nightfall, similar protests emerged in Uganda, Kenya, Morocco, and even parts of Europe. The world was no longer split by borders. It was split by truth. And inside his modest office, Traoré received a handwritten letter from Zolika herself. It ended with just one sentence. Africa is standing because you refused to sit. He folded the letter carefully and prepared for the next storm. At a secure U.S. embassy in West Africa, a young American diplomat named Sarah sat alone in her office. She had been following Traoré's story, not through official briefings, but through her phone, through the tears of African children, through the songs of mothers, through the trembling voice in his letter. Something inside her cracked. That evening, she made a choice. She opened her laptop and quietly typed a letter to her superiors. I request reassignment from this mission. I cannot be part of what I believe history will one day condemn. Then she did something even bolder. She recorded a private message on her phone and posted it anonymously. I am American, and I believe in justice. But what we are doing to Traoré, this isn't justice. This is fear disguised as power. It went viral. The State Department denied it, called it unauthorized. But it was too late, because people around the world saw her face, her tears, and in that moment, the line between sides disappeared. This wasn't Africa versus America anymore. It was right versus wrong. And the tide? It was turning. On a quiet Thursday night, the city lights of Ouagadougou began to flicker. One by one, the street lamps dimmed. Phone signals dropped. TV channels froze. Burkina Faso had been digitally silenced. Many feared the worst. A U.S. cyber attack, maybe a final move before military invasion. In the dark, people lit candles. Some sang, some prayed. And in villages with no power to begin with, they lit fires of resistance. Yet inside the presidential compound, Traoré remained calm. He lit no lights. He gave no speech. He simply sat by the window, watching the darkness like a man watching history unfold. Then, an old man appeared outside the gates, alone, holding a drum. He began to play. Moments later, another joined him, then another, then 300, then thousands. In total darkness, Africa's heartbeat spoke louder than bullets. From rooftops, from balconies, from fields, the sound of unity rose. Traoré walked out without guards and stood among them. He didn't speak. He just nodded. For the first time in history, a nation without light still glowed. The world saw the footage, and millions broke into tears. The sun hadn't risen yet when Traoré's aide rushed into his office. Sir, there's a call from the Vatican. He paused. From the Pope himself. The room fell silent. Traoré picked up the secure line. The voice on the other end was soft, warm, and slow. My son, I do not call to offer politics. I call to offer prayer. Traoré didn't speak right away. He listened. There are moments, the Pope continued, when silence becomes the world's loudest cry. You have stood with that silence, and it has awakened the earth. Tears welled up in Traoré's eyes, not because of fear, but because someone outside Africa finally understood. After the call, Traoré wrote a single line in his journal. We are no longer alone. That afternoon, Catholic churches across the globe rang their bells for 1 full minute in solidarity, from Rome to Rio, from Cape Town to Canada. Millions knelt not for war, but for peace, born from courage. In Washington, Trump turned to his team and said, if even the Pope is getting involved, maybe we waited too long. But it was no longer in his control. Something higher had taken over. Word spread like fire.
U.S. troops were now just 30 kilometers from Burkina Faso's northern border. Time was running out. But instead of hiding, instead of fleeing, Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked into the street, alone, no suit, no bulletproof vest, just his uniform and a single message. If they must arrest me, let them find me with my people. He walked, block after block. People began to join him. Children, soldiers, vendors, students, elders in wheelchairs. By the time he reached the Independence Monument, there were over 100,000 behind him. No chants, no violence, only silence. So loud it shook the world. Helicopters hovered above. Drones circled. A U.S. general watched from a base camp and radioed Washington. "Sir, if we move now, we're going to crush civilians." Trump didn't speak. For the first time, he stared at the screen with uncertainty. "What is this?" he muttered. And the reply came from his own advisor. "This is leadership we'll never understand." The world held its breath. And Traoré? He raised his fist once, not in anger, but in hope.
As the crowd surrounded Ibrahim Traoré in complete silence, U.S. drones hovered overhead, scanning, watching. Inside a war room in Washington, tension choked the air. One general leaned in. "We have a clean shot. Do we move?" Trump stared at the screen. Traoré standing still, thousands behind him. A little girl on his shoulders holding a flower. And then, something happened. The child dropped the flower. It landed on the ground in front of Traoré. He knelt, picked it up, and gently placed it in his pocket. In that moment, the world saw not a general, not a politician, but a man, a father, a symbol, a protector. Suddenly, a tear fell from one of the Pentagon aides, then another, and another. And in the control room, a low voice finally broke the silence. "Sir, if we push this button, we'll create a martyr, not a message." Trump stood frozen. On live feed, a journalist whispered, "He didn't raise a gun. He raised our humanity." And at that moment, something snapped inside the world. It no longer wanted to watch. It wanted to follow. The call never came. The strike never launched. Instead, President Trump walked out of the command room, silently. He didn't explain. He didn't speak to the press. He simply vanished from the screen that once shook the world. And across Africa, people began to cry, but not out of fear, out of relief, out of hope, out of truth finally seen. Traoré remained in the street for hours, surrounded by people. Soldiers brought no weapons. Mothers brought water. Children fell asleep on the ground near his boots. Then, an official message came through. The United States is suspending all military actions in Burkina Faso. We will pursue peaceful dialogue moving forward. The streets exploded with emotion. Some screamed. Others dropped to their knees. Grown men hugged strangers. Elders lifted their canes and danced. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré? He looked to the sky, whispered something only he heard, then finally sat down, not as a defeated man, but as one who stood for millions and never bowed. The war never happened, but the world had already changed. A week later, Traoré stepped into the same studio where this all began. The world waited. No music, no special effects, just silence. He looked into the camera with gentle eyes and said, "I was not born to fight the West. I was born to protect the dignity of my people." He paused, then added, "I forgive everything, but I will never forget what the people did when power tried to silence our soul." Behind him appeared images of the women who stood at the border, the child with the flower, the American soldier who refused to fire, the Vatican call, the letter, the marches, the candlelit vigils, and the silence that saved a nation. The screen faded to black, but before it did, One final message appeared. To be free is to remember who you are when the world tells you to forget. People everywhere, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Atlanta, in Port-au-Prince, in Marseille, wiped their eyes. Even hardened politicians looked down in silence. This was no longer just a story. It was a mirror. If this story moved you, don't scroll. Do this now. Like this video, if you believe Africa deserves dignity. Comment, I stand with Traoré, if his courage touched your heart. Subscribe to hear more stories that awaken the soul and unite humanity. One voice can rise, but millions, they can change the world.